Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Wild Bastards. So, for those not across it, I do overviews on this channel. I take a look at the first 2 hours of a game, that's the Steam refund window. Steam says that you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time period, and I would broadly as a rule agree and say 20 hours in, you usually aren't going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short punchy video. Keep it under 10 minutes, broad strokes info, and then you can make up your mind on your own. Okay, so a few things to get out of the way. Pedigree. This is developed by Blue Man Chew, and probably most notably and most recently their last release, which was Void Bastards. Similar naming convention. You can even have a look at it at first blush. This first person run like roguelike. Is this roguelike though? Kind of maybe not. They've changed it a bit. But yeah, it's a spiritual successor. It's taken a lot of learnings from that, but it is actually doing its own twist in many ways. And look, I'll take this opportunity to shout out their first release, which was Card Hunter. I think it's being taken over by a different studio these days as a sort of support studio. But that's a free-to-play, turn-based tactics, top-down game with a like Dungeons & Dragons aesthetic. You should check it out, actually. I hold it in high regard still to this day. I really enjoy it. And likewise, Void Bastards, absolutely love that to death. What a great game, many hours put into it. So does this live up to it? In many ways, yes. But I think it's going to come down to flavor. If you found the repetitive, grindy nature of Void Bastards to be just that, a bit much, then you might actually like this better. However, I really enjoyed that aspect of Void Bastards. They're doing procedurals, spaceship raids, you know, going to the different parts of ship and managing the sort of survival resources and that. This isn't really doing that so much. This is a little bit more linear. So they're probably the main differences. Obviously, they still have a sort of aesthetic similarity in the art direction and style, but the setting, the period, is that this is very much a Western outlaw gunslinger thing in space. Robots and mutants in your posse versus the rest of the world, I guess. It works really well because that's something I was wondering how they're going to do it. I love Westerns, I really do. And their sort of humor that they went for in Void Bastards was probably, you could closely compare it to something like Hitchhiker's Guide. It had a very high tea British flavor to all of the, you know, the voice lines and the enemy types, and it was hilarious. But then you're gonna go American Western. Do they stick the landing? Yes, they do. It's fucking hilarious again still. So it wasn't just British people being British. This is just funny people knowing how to do what they're doing well. At its core, you have a posse, the Wild Bastards, and you're kind of recovering from being essentially wiped out almost to a man. So you start off a bit tutorial with a handful of dudes. You move through a sort of linear campaign, definitely more linear than Void Bastards, where you essentially jump forward. Actually, you know what? It's closer to something like FTL. That's probably one way of putting it. So like, would you call FTL linear? To a certain point in that it has forward impetus. You move to the next section, but within that next section, you can path through a la a more traditional roguelike run-based thing. But at the end of the day, you're doing these levels sequentially, and at the end of them, you'll unlock this coffin card thing where you can essentially resurrect one of the old posse. So as you move forward, you're building out your posse of heroes and characters from jump to jump. So that's sort of the main conceit, and in a way the main difference from Void Bastards, where it was more about wiping, repeating, starting over again, and trying to buy incremental upgrades for your sort of character. And you'd have a random character each run. Every time they die, they'd come back. You know, you might have a dude with dwarfism or color blindness or that sort of gimmick stuff. Not so here. If you wipe, which I did, it just resets you to the start of that jump. And I think it gives you a little bit of a bonus as well. So there is a more campaign-based permanency to it. So the way that it plays out is you jump into these sectors, you choose from a few paths through it, you drop down onto a planet, and you're essentially like locked onto the planet in this sort of world instance, world within worlds. There's kind of 3 layers to it. So you've got the overworld space jump, and then you go down to the planet. You guys break the lock MacGuffin thing, so then you can teleport back up, but then that's the next layer of a map, is that you have to navigate this instanced world map to get to the teleporter thing to jump back up to your ship. But in the meantime, you fight bad guys, there's patrols, there's roadblocks. It's all quite sprawling and you have to try and pick your poison, and then there'll be a doom timer. Probably the funniest voice acted dude I've ever heard before, McNeil or something like that. He's just getting into the real vocal hiccup kind of, oh, howdy, partner. And it's just so good. Everything that dude says is fucking funny. In fact, everything everyone says in this is hilarious and just well acted, and they're all leaning into their cowboy stereotype parts. But yeah, so you move around, you loot spots, you pick up bonuses, and then you try and teleport out before this Doom Timer guy comes along. So we've seen this method before. And then when you have the little combat moments, they are these tiny little vignetted instances. Probably don't go for more than a minute or two. And they call it a showdown, where you run around and you basically just gun down with the enemies, and they vocally bark a lot. That's a big part of the loop. And yeah, looking at the footage, you might go, I don't know, I'm not sold on it, because I went into this obviously excited about the pedigree and the previous Void Bastards, but I couldn't help but compare it to Void Bastards and go, this doesn't have the part that I really loved about that game, which was these procedural spaceships that you could navigate through. Now it's kind of just this big open, almost small stage play setting, but the way that it plays out, it actually marries into the kind of cowboy high noon throwdown a lot better. And so you'll be moving through these spaces, listening to the wind whistle and listening out for barks, and the way that you cut through it is very much like that punchy minute or so action set piece that you'll have from something like Tombstone or whatever. So it's very distilled and it's very different, and I actually really quite like it. And they can be very, very lethal as well. Health, armor, all that carries over, and a big part of the loop is, trying to refurb that. If your dudes go down, they go into an injured state, and all injured will wipe you back to the beginning of that space instance. There's this cool Posy, I think they call it a bunch mechanic, where you have your heroes beam down to the planet, just depending on the planet. Sometimes you might only be able to put down 2 dudes, other times 3 or 4, and it puts them into little 2-man bunches. And you can mix and match, and so through the course of a little combat exchange, you press, I think it was Q, to just switch between one of the 2 people. And it's kind of cool because while you're maybe playing one character, the other one's over your shoulder, in your head as it were, pep talking you and a bit of banter and that. And it works all right. It's a better way of doing the chatty Cathy nonsense that's a bit played out in industry. And then they get special abilities that they can pick up power-ups, and someone will have a taunt, or another dude, Casino, I quite like him. He's like Calculon with a slot machine face. He can just explode a random dude on the map. So there becomes this interplay of not just switching in and out in the middle of the minute-long fight to feather health bars and avoid one of them being lethal, but you also want to try and figure out who you're going to try and use their special ability for. So there's a tactical interplay there. And like I said, very distilled, very short, punchy moments, and it's great. It's actually going to give more legs to the game, because that sort of thing would probably wear you out. Speaking of legs as well, like I said, it is a bit more sort of campaign-ish. I've unlocked I think you start with 2, and I've probably unlocked 5 of the team so far, and there's a few more to go. So I don't expect the rest of the campaign on whatever this is, standard difficulty, to take much more than a couple more hours, a couple more jumps. And then from there, and looking through the achievements, because I can only really speak on what I've played, there seems to be a lot of Iron Man, Super Iron Man, very hard difficulties, and there seems to be some sort of procedural campaign mode, but you have to clock the campaign first to unlock it. So it does seem to have longevity, but again, it's definitely doing the model different to Void Bastards. That's probably the main takeaway, I would say, is the overarching sort of roguelike nature. They're doing 2 different types of roguelikes, I suppose you could say, that you do see, with this one being a little bit more permanency, linear, campaign-ish. I hope this makes sense. Anyway, all in all, similar enough and different enough. And I think either left or right of field is usually where a lot of studios mess up, where they just try and regurgitate the exact same thing one-to-one, and that makes it stale. Or, in a more rare case, they pivot too hard and they kind of disrespect their core base that we're buying in for the sequel, as it were. So this is good. It's doing its own thing, but it's still familiar. And it would be an easy recommend for a fan of Void Bastards. But if you're still Fence City, you could probably pick that up on the cheap, given that it's a few years removed, or at the very least, try out Card Hunter. Very different, but it's free as well. Anyway, those are my thoughts, team. Might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.